Morning, everybody. Welcome to another video devotion. The thoughts this week come from our Bible class on Sunday morning. We're looking at some of the cultural changes of the 1960s and how those things continue to impact how we do mission in the church many years later. And the verse I want to read today comes from Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I was thinking about parenting. I was thinking about the parenting that my parents did compared to the parenting that I do. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my parents taught me to conform to culture. Culture set the norms and the values and the rules, and for the most part, they were good. And so we were taught to conform to culture. Certainly, there were some subculture things going on that weren't that good, and we were taught to avoid them. But for the most part, we were taught to conform to the culture. And I think about the parenting that I did with my kids 30, 40, 50 years later. And by and large, my parenting was to teach my kids not to conform to culture. The culture had changed, and there were a lot of things about the culture that we did not want to conform to. And this verse for Romans 12:2, I think, has become a very important verse for me. It says, don't be conformed to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Just some great words for us as individuals, as parents, as the church. Don't be conformed to the world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Every time we worship, every time we hear the word of God, every time we open our Bibles and read the word of God, our minds are being renewed by God. Our minds are being aligned with the mind and the heart of God. And so it's important that we, as the people of God, that we are, we're certainly, we live in the world, we interact with the culture. We don't want to withdraw from the culture, but we also don't want to conform to the culture. We want to be transformed, as Paul says, by the renewing of our mind. So spend some time in the Word this week. Focus on worship. Focus on prayer. Let God renew your mind, and then God has a promise for you. He says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. Let God renew your mind by the power of his word, and you will see what God's will is. Well, that's it for this week. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.